Imagine being told that everything you knew about human history was a lie. For centuries, we've dismissed tales of massive sea monsters crushing ships, legendary golden cities lost to time, and bizarre tiny humanoid creatures as nothing more than bedtime stories. They were myths, meant to scare children or entertain naive ancient people. But what happens when the archaeologists stop laughing? What happens when the bones are unearthed, the sunken ruins are found, and the legends suddenly become terrifyingly real? Today, we are opening the vault on the myths that science desperately tried to deny. For over 2,000 years, the greatest story ever told was considered a complete fabrication. If you went to school anywhere in the Western world, you learned about Homer's Iliad. You learned about the towering, impenetrable walls of Troy. You heard the epic tales of Achilles dragging Hector's body behind his chariot, the face of Helen that launched 1,000 ships, and the cunning deception of the Trojan horse that finally brought a mighty empire to its knees in a sea of fire and blood. To the brilliant minds and serious historians of the 18th and 19th centuries, this was nothing more than magnificent poetry. Searching for the physical city of Troy was viewed with the same academic mockery as searching for the wizarding world or the lost city of Atlantis. It was an established, unquestionable fact. Troy never existed. The 10-Year War was a metaphor. Enter Heinrich Schliemann. Schliemann was not a trained archaeologist. He was a wealthy German businessman, an eccentric millionaire who harbored a burning childhood obsession with Homer's epics. While the academics sat in their dusty libraries writing papers about Greek mythology, Schliemann took his fortune, grabbed a copy of the Iliad, and treated it not as a poem, but as a treasure map. He was operating under a radical, almost crazy assumption. What if the ancients weren't lying? In the early 1870s, his obsession led him to a hill called Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. The local geography perfectly matched Homer's descriptions: the rivers, the distance to the sea, the sweeping plains. Schliemann started digging, and he didn't just dig delicately with brushes, he used dynamite. It was an archaeological nightmare, but it yielded results that shook the foundation of history. Beneath the dirt, Schliemann didn't just find a city. He found an entire layered cake of civilizations. 9 distinct cities, stacked directly on top of one another, spanning thousands of years. But it was in the layer known as Troy Sixth and Troy Seventh where the myth violently collided with reality. Excavators found massive, sloping stone walls that matched the impenetrable descriptions in the Iliad. Even more chilling, they found scattered arrowheads, unburied skeletons in the streets, and a thick layer of ash and charred debris. The city hadn't just been abandoned, it had been utterly destroyed in a massive, brutal siege. The golden jewelry Schliemann pulled from the earth, which he famously draped over his wife and called Priam's treasure, proved that this was a city of immense wealth. The academics were silenced. The war may have been exaggerated by poets, and the gods probably weren't throwing lightning bolts from Mount Olympus, but the core foundation of the legend was absolute truth. Troy was real. It bled, it burned, and its ruins were waiting in the dirt all along. If a lost city of that magnitude could simply be misplaced by history, we have to look out toward the vast, unexplored darkness of the ocean. If you were a sailor navigating the treacherous, icy waters of the North Atlantic any time between the 12th and 18th centuries, there was one word you prayed never to hear: the Kraken. Scandinavian folklore painted a picture of a nightmare ripped straight from hell. It was described as a cephalopod of unimaginable proportions, a beast so massive that its body was often mistaken for a floating island. When a ship sailed too close, giant, thrashing tentacles would breach the surface, wrapping around the wooden masts and snapping the hull like a twig, dragging entire crews down into the crushing, freezing abyss. For hundreds of years, maritime authorities dismissed these accounts. They blamed the disappearance of ships on rogue waves, whirlpools, or the drunken, sun-baked hallucinations of sailors who had spent too many months eating salted pork. A giant octopus that could wrestle a galleon? It was biologically impossible. It was a myth for pirates. Then, the ocean decided to speak up. In the 1870s, curiously around the same time Schliemann was blowing up Troy, massive, alien-looking biological remains began washing ashore on the rugged beaches of Newfoundland, Canada. These weren't whales or normal fish. They were massive, fleshy tentacles lined with serrated, razor-sharp suckers. Science could no longer deny the nightmare. They had to give the Kraken an official Latin name, Architeuthis dux, the giant squid. Modern marine biology has since revealed just how terrifyingly accurate the ancient sailors were. The giant squid is not a myth, it is an apex predator of the deep. They can grow up to 43 feet long, the size of a school bus. They possess eyes the size of large dinner plates, the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, perfectly evolved to spot the faint bioluminescence of prey in the pitch-black void of the deep ocean. Their tentacles are equipped with hundreds of suction cups, each lined with a ring of sharp teeth designed to latch onto prey and never let go. At the center of their arms lies a beak made of chitin, the same material as spider fangs, powerful enough to snap through steel cables and crush bone with ease. We now know that these mythical beasts engage in violent, to-the-death battles with massive sperm whales, thousands of feet below the surface. Whales frequently wash up covered in massive, circular scars from the squid's tentacles. The sailors weren't hallucinating. They were simply encountering a monster that human minds weren't ready to comprehend. We can accept that ancient cities were lost to time. We can even accept that bizarre giant monsters hide in the unexplored depths of the ocean. But it's much harder to swallow a myth when it challenges what we see in the mirror. What if the most shocking legend isn't about a place or a beast, but about us? What if I told you that a mythical race of creatures, tiny humans, right out of a fantasy novel weren't just a product of human imagination, but a completely distinct species that walked this earth alongside us? And maybe, just maybe, survived long enough to look us in the eye? For generations, the indigenous people of Flores, a remote Indonesian island, whispered terrifying stories about the Abu Gogo. According to local legend, these were tiny, hairy cave dwellers, barely 3 feet tall. They spoke in strange murmurs, had an insatiable appetite, and would snatch food from the villages under the cover of darkness. For centuries, anthropologists and visiting European scientists wrote off the Abu Gogo as just another cultural bogeyman. It was a folklore invented to keep mischievous children from wandering into the dense, unforgiving jungle at night. But in 2003, a team of archaeologists exploring the damp, echoing chambers of the Liangbua cave on Flores made a discovery that sent a violent shockwave through the global scientific community. They found bones, but they weren't the bones of human children, and they certainly weren't monkeys. They belonged to a completely unknown miniature species of human. Science officially named them Homo floresiensis. The media, however, immediately dubbed them Hobbits. These creatures stood exactly 3 feet tall. They had brains the size of a chimpanzee's, yet they used sophisticated stone tools, manipulated fire, and hunted miniature elephants known as stegodons. And the most terrifying part? Carbon dating revealed they survived on the island until roughly 50,000 years ago. This meant they walked this earth at the exact same time as our modern human ancestors. The Abu Gogo weren't fairy tales. They were passed down, ancestral memories, echoes of a time when Homo sapiens were not the only human species on the planet. We shared this world with others. Pattern interrupt. The sound of howling wind and crashing ocean waves cutting abruptly to total silence. If sharing the earth with another human species shatters your view of biology, then our next myth will shatter your view of modern civilization. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. It is the most famous nursery rhyme in American history. We are taught from our very first days in school that Christopher Columbus heroically discovered the New World. But what if I told you that another group of explorers beat him to it by nearly 500 years? For centuries, ancient Norse texts known as the Vinland Sagas detailed the epic, blood-soaked voyages of Leif Erikson. The sagas described a perilous journey across the violent, icy Atlantic to a lush, strange land full of wild grapes, timber, and hostile natives, which they called Vinland. For hundreds of years, elite European historians dismissed these sagas as pure Viking mythology. They were considered heroic poetry, meant only to entertain drunk warriors in firelit mead halls. There was absolutely no way a group of bearded raiders in open, wooden longships could cross the Atlantic Ocean half a millennium before the massive Spanish galleons. Until the year 1960, a Norwegian explorer named Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, decided to do something radical. They treated the ancient sagas like a literal treasure map. Their obsessive search led them to the remote, windswept northernmost tip of Newfoundland, Canada, to a sleepy place called Les Augmeadows. Beneath the overgrown turf, they didn't find Native American artifacts. They found iron nails, bronze fastening pins, and the unmistakable, massive foundations of Viking longhouses. The architecture matched exactly with known Viking settlements in Greenland and Iceland. Carbon dating confirmed the impossible. The settlement was built around the year 1000 AD. The history books had to be rewritten immediately. The mighty Vikings didn't just terrorize the coasts of Europe. They were the first Europeans to set foot in North America. The myth of Vinland was entirely, undeniably real. The sagas were not poems, they were historical records. Open-loop closure and the ultimate myth. So, we've found mythical cities, deep-sea monsters, ancient hobbits, and lost Viking settlements. But there is one legend that towers above them all. A story so famous, so deeply embedded in our global consciousness, that its name is synonymous with mystery itself. Around 360 BC, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote of an advanced, utopian island civilization that had conquered much of the known world. But the inhabitants grew hubristic and angered the gods. In a single day and night of catastrophic fire and earthquakes, the entire island was swallowed by the sea, lost forever. He called it Atlantis. For over 2,000 years, Atlantis has been the holy grail of myths. People have searched for it in the Caribbean, off the coast of Africa, and under the ice of Antarctica. But modern archaeology and geology point to a much more terrifying, real-world origin for Plato's story. Just 70 miles north of the island of Crete in the Aegean Sea lies Santorini, once known as Thera. In the Bronze Age, Thera was home to the Minoans, a highly advanced civilization with running water, multi-story buildings, beautiful frescoes, and a massive naval fleet. They were the dominant superpower of the Mediterranean. But around 1600 BC, the center of the island blew up. Thera was a volcanic island, and it experienced one of the most violent, catastrophic eruptions in human history. The blast was roughly 4 times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. It sent a massive plume of ash and rock 20 miles into the stratosphere, blocking out the sun for days. It triggered mega tsunamis, estimated to be hundreds of feet high, which slammed into the surrounding islands, completely obliterating the Minoan civilization's coastal cities in a matter of hours. The center of Thera collapsed into the sea, leaving behind the crescent-shaped caldera we see today. The Minoan Empire was wiped off the map almost overnight in a single day of fire and water. Egyptian records from the time describe a massive catastrophe of darkness and storms. Centuries later, these historical accounts of an advanced island-dwelling civilization destroyed by the sea were passed down, translated, and eventually reached Plato, who immortalized it as the myth of Atlantis. Atlantis isn't hiding at the bottom of the ocean. It was blown to pieces. Conclusion and call to action. History is not a fixed, immovable object. It is a living, breathing puzzle, and we are still finding the missing pieces in the dirt, deep in the ocean, and in the DNA of our ancestors. The myths of our past aren't always fantasies. Sometimes they are simply histories that we forgot how to read. If you want to keep exploring the dark, hidden corners of human history, hit that subscribe button right now. We have so many more secrets to uncover. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me, which of these myths turning out to be true shocked you the most? Was it the Hobbits, the Kraken, or the true story of Atlantis? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next mystery.